India is one of the most ambitious social experiments in the world. Now, some people claim that it's America, but I disagree with that. More than a billion people, so many different customs, languages, different ways of life, religions, and yet all of us are supposed to operate under one national identity. Every day, these differences are expected to coexist under the same laws and institutions. That alone can make trust difficult. Trust is easier when the people are familiar, when they can understand each other, when they can predict each other's behavior. But what happens when such familiarity is rare? What happens when you live in a country where millions of people believe that life is a competition, that opportunities are scarce, and that being too trusting of a person is a risk they cannot afford? That's how you get a society where people learn to be cautious, a society where suspicion arrives before trust. And over time, that caution begins to shape everything, from relationships to business to politics to even daily life. So this trust problem starts with diversity because humans are tribal by nature. For most of our history, we lived in small groups where everyone knew everyone else. People spoke the same language, followed the same customs, shared the same values, and often knew each other's families for generations. Sheer trust felt natural because familiarity felt natural, and India is the exact opposite of that environment. Every few hundred kilometers, the language changes, food changes, and not just that. Here even the customs change, social norms change, sometimes even basic assumptions about life change. A person from Kerala, a person from Rajasthan, and a person from Nagaland may all be considered the citizens of the same country, yet their experiences, cultures, and the way of thinking can be dramatically different. And don't get me wrong, it's not a criticism. It's one of our biggest strengths actually when you look at it. But diversity also creates a challenge that people rarely talk about. Trust is easier when people feel predictable. When you understand someone's language, customs, and social cues, you can usually predict how they will behave. You know what's considered polite. You know what's considered rude. You know what values they were likely raised with. And consequently, the more unfamiliar someone feels, the more difficult it becomes to predict their behavior. An uncertainty like that is the enemy of trust. This doesn't mean that people consciously dislike each other. In fact, most of the times, this operates beneath the surface. People naturally gravitate towards those who feel familiar. Same language, same community, same region, same religion, same social background, same education level, same economic class, things like that. This is why Indians often build strong trust within their own groups while remaining cautious of everyone who's not a part of that group. We trust circles before we trust strangers. The result is a society filled with invisible boundaries. Psychological boundaries. People may live in the same city, work in the same office, or travel on the same train, but they often carry a lot of assumptions about the world and people around them. And when a society is made of hundreds of different tribes, both large and small, trust becomes harder to establish. Because before we can trust, people need a reason to believe that a stranger standing in front of them shares the same rules of the game. In India, that kind of certainty is often missing. And when certainty is missing, suspicion quietly takes its place. This is where the story of India being a low-trust society begins. Now, here you might push back by saying that diversity doesn't explain everything. And you're right, because there are so many other diverse societies in the world. The problem here is when diversity is combined with scarcity. For most Indians, life from the very beginning feels like a competition. A competition for school admissions, a competition for college seats, a competition for government jobs, a competition for private jobs, a competition for promotions, a competition for housing, a competition for opportunities. From childhood, people are taught that there are far more people chasing success than there are opportunities available. And whether that belief is completely true or partially true doesn't matter. What matters is that millions of people grow up believing it. Over time, this changes how people see the world. When opportunities are abundant, strangers can feel like potential partners. But when opportunities are scarce, strangers can feel like competition. The person standing next to you isn't just another person. It's someone competing for the same seat, the same job, the same promotion. the same customer, the same opportunity, the same future. And once enough people begin seeing life this way, people stop assuming cooperation and start assuming competition. Now, this mindset is very common among Indians. You can see it in schools, in workplaces, in businesses, and even in families, where relatives compare incomes, careers, marriages, and achievements. Life is a race, and races don't encourage trust. They encourage caution, they encourage self-preservation, they encourage people to constantly calculate where they stand relative to everyone else. Here the problem is that the mindset doesn't stay limited to career or education. Eventually it spills into everyday life. People become skeptical of generosity, suspicious of kindness, wary of strangers. Because somewhere deep down, we've learned to believe that everyone is looking out for themselves first. And if everybody's looking out just for themselves, trusting someone starts to feel less like wisdom and more like a risk. You see, a society doesn't become low trust overnight. It becomes low trust when millions of people erroneously believe that life is just a competition. Now, if everybody perceives life as a competition, then just like in any other competition, people only care about the people who are winning. Right? It makes sense. And in India, winning is often measured through status, money, power, education, job titles, social standing, and influence. The higher someone appears on the social ladder, the more respect they tend to receive. Now, to be fair, this isn't unique to India. It kinda happens everywhere. But in India, hierarchy is often deeply embedded in everyday life. You can see it in the way people speak, the way they dress around certain people, the way they behave around authority figures, the way they treat someone who appears important versus someone who appears, well, not so important. No, think about it. A wealthy businessman says something and people listen carefully. A politician arrives and people suddenly become polite. A celebrity walks by and crowds gather instantly. But now imagine a sanitation worker, a delivery driver, a laborer, a homeless person, someone with no visible status. The level of respect given often changes dramatically with the person's so-called social status. Most honest Indians know exactly what I'm talking about. And this creates a problem that goes far beyond manners. Because trust depends on a simple idea, that every person deserves a basic level of dignity regardless of their status. Not because they're rich, not because they're useful, not because they're powerful, but because they're human. When a society begins sorting people primarily by status, that society becomes weaker by principle. People start treating others according to what they can gain from them. Relationships become fully transactional. Kindness becomes selective. Respect becomes conditional. And once respect becomes conditional, trust becomes conditional too. People begin asking questions like, who is this person? What do they do? How much do they earn? Which family do they come from? People ask these things before deciding how much respect to give a certain person. In other words, people stop seeing individuals first. They start seeing rank. And when everyone is constantly measuring everyone else's position on the social ladder, genuine trust becomes harder to build. Because trust requires equality. And I'm not talking about equality of wealth or equality of achievement. I'm talking about equality of human worth. People who instinctively respect power more than human life will eventually struggle to trust one another. Because sooner or later, everyone comes to the same conclusion. Respect isn't given freely. It has to be earned through status. And if respect itself feels conditional, then why would trust be any different? When status becomes important, people start focusing on just success. They focus more on looking successful rather than being successful. Now again, this isn't uniquely Indian. Human beings everywhere care about status. But in India, social judgment is relentless. People are constantly being evaluated. Let's say by relatives, by neighbors, by colleagues, by society itself. What do you do? How much do you earn? When are you getting married? Which college did you attend? Now, questions like these may sound harmless, but underneath them is often a quiet attempt to determine whether someone belongs in the same social rank. Here, success becomes performative, confidence becomes performative, Happiness becomes performative. Sometimes even morality becomes performative. Social media has only amplified this tendency of ours. People showcase the highlights, the vacations, the achievements, the celebrations, but rarely do they display the anxiety, the insecurity, and the struggles. Everyone appears to be winning, even when many are struggling behind the scenes. And the more people perform, the harder it becomes to know what's real. Trust grows when people feel they're interacting with a real person and not a carefully constructed image. Not a personal brand, not a status advertisement, but a real human being. In a society obsessed with appearances, people learn to hide weaknesses, failures. They learn to hide vulnerabilities, uncertainties. And the result is a strange paradox. A paradox where millions of people desperately want acceptance, while simultaneously hiding the parts of themselves that help create genuine human bonds. And when everyone knows you're performing, they become suspicious of you, because nobody is quite sure what's real anymore. The person with the expensive car may be drowning in debt. The person boasting about success may be deeply insecure. The one perfect family that you know may be falling apart behind closed doors. Eventually, people learn to question everything. And why won't they? They've seen too many masks and very few genuine faces. And a society full of masks will always struggle to become a society full of trust. Now, in a society like this, the biggest casualty becomes empathy. Because trust doesn't require just honesty. It requires the ability to see another person as human. And that's where many of us struggle. Think about how different people are treated depending on where they stand in society. A rich person's problems are taken seriously. A powerful person's complaints get attention. An influential person's voice gets amplified. But what about someone who has no status? The poor, the unemployed, the laborer, the migrant worker, the street vendor, the sanitation worker. The person at the very bottom of the ladder. Too often, their suffering becomes invisible. Why? Because many have been conditioned to believe that one's status determines their value. And once you start measuring people by status, empathy becomes selective. You begin caring more about some people than others. You begin listening to some voices while ignoring others. You begin treating certain struggles as important and other struggles as deserved. In fact, one of the most common responses to suffering in India is not compassion, it's judgment. If he's poor, he must have done something wrong. If she's struggling, she must have made bad choices. If they failed, they probably didn't work hard enough. These assumptions allow people to distance themselves from the pain of others who are just like them. Nobody has to confront uncomfortable questions about society. Nobody has to acknowledge how much luck, privilege, opportunity, or circumstance shape people's lives. It's a comforting belief, but it comes at a cost. We know that empathy is one of the foundations of trust. People trust societies where they believe others will treat them fairly when they're vulnerable, when they're sick, when they're unemployed, when they're struggling, when they're falling behind. But if people believe that they will be judged instead of understood, they stop opening up. They stop asking for help. They stop believing others have their best interests at heart. And slowly, everyone becomes emotionally isolated, surrounded by people, yet feeling alone. Now, the irony here is that India often describes itself as a deeply compassionate society. But compassion that completely depends on familiarity has limits. Trust grows when empathy extends beyond the people who look like us, think like us, or even belong to our group. Because the true test of empathy isn't how we treat people we relate to. It's how we treat people who have nothing to offer us. And any society that struggles to see dignity in the powerless will eventually struggle to trust itself. By now, the problem should start making sense. A highly diverse society, constant competition, status obsession, performative success, conditional empathy. Put all of these ingredients together and you get something powerful. A society that expects the worst from people. Think about how many everyday interactions begin with suspicion. Interactions with, say, the mechanic, the broker, the contractor, the doctor, the lawyer, the landlord, the tenant, the employer, the employee, the government official, the customer service representative, the stranger calling you on your phone. Before you even start talking to this person, You ask yourself, how is this person going to cheat me? What's the catch? What does this person really want? Where's the scam? And to be fair, those fears are justified. People do get cheated. People do get exploited. And people do get lied to. But the problem begins when suspicion stops being an occasional defense mechanism and becomes a default worldview. When trust becomes the exception instead of the rule, you can reach very faulty conclusions. If someone is unusually kind, people become suspicious. If someone offers help, they become suspicious. If someone is generous, they become suspicious. If someone is honest, they become suspicious. Many Indians have become so accustomed to manipulation that genuine goodwill often feels unrealistic. Sometimes people trust bad intentions more easily than good intentions because bad intentions feel familiar and familiarity feels safe. Think about how strange that is. A society where people are surprised by honesty. A society where integrity feels exceptional. A society where decency is treated as a pleasant shock rather than a normal expectation. Over time, this mindset becomes self-reinforcing. Yet people actually expect dishonesty so that they can become defensive. Others interpret that defensiveness as distrust, which makes them defensive too. And before long, everyone is operating behind invisible walls, protecting themselves, questioning motives, preparing for disappointment. And once a society reaches that point, trust becomes incredibly difficult to rebuild. Because trust doesn't disappear when people stop believing in each other. Trust disappears when people stop believing that other people are capable of being better than their worst stereotypes. Not that we distrust each other, but that we've become conditioned to expect nothing but disappointment from one another. Honestly, I don't think Indians are uniquely bad people. In fact, if you've lived here long enough, you've probably seen incredible generosity too. Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers coming together during disasters, people donating money they can't afford to donate, families sacrificing everything for one another. The capacity for trust here actually exists. The capacity for empathy exists too. The problem here is that these qualities often remain trapped inside our own circles. Family, friends, community, people who feel familiar, people who feel safe. Now the challenge for India isn't learning how to trust. We already know how to do that. The challenge is learning how to extend that trust beyond our tribes, beyond our status groups, beyond our language, religion, class, region, and social circles. Because a society cannot become truly strong when everyone is only looking out for themselves. It becomes strong when strangers can cooperate, when dignity is given freely, when empathy isn't reserved only for the people we know, and when trust becomes the default instead of suspicion. And maybe that's the real question we should be asking. Not why Indians don't trust each other, but what kind of society would we have to build for trust to become possible again? After all, trust is the foundation upon which every healthy society is built. Until we learn to trust each other a little more, we'll continue to pay the price for a problem most of us don't even realize we're living with.